Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 educators in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with standards set by the Tennessee Department of Education. For more professional development videos, check out our website at www.mtsu.edu/CEM.
I am so happy to welcome Ms. Hannah Hopper. She is the ESL program coordinator in Hamblin County. She was nominated in the nominations. So she was nominated because of the good work happening in Hamblin County. Keep in mind, we are keenly aware that issues in rural districts versus issues in suburban districts versus issues in urban districts vary. But we're trying to find what is the universal need that crosses all of those, knowing that resources particularly vary in those three kinds of districts. So, Ms. Hannah Hopper, we're happy you're here today, and so I'll give the floor to you.
Thank you so much. Like she said, my name is Hannah Hopper. I have been in the field of education for about 10 years. I have served as an EL teacher, ESL teacher, and am recently transitioning into my new role as an ESL program coordinator. So I am so excited to be back here on the MTSU campus. It looks quite different than it did when I was a student here, but I'm so excited to be here, and I'm most excited to be here to learn alongside you all today as experts in the field. And I have already taken away so much learning from this morning's sessions that were just absolutely excellent and outstanding. So I hope that we can continue to share and collaborate in this session. So today we're going to be talking about language and content in the co-taught classroom. And so our objectives are to explore multilingual students, explore supporting multilingual students through simultaneous content and linguistic instruction, and to deepen our understanding of co-teaching and considerations for effective implementation. So we're going to dive in thinking about language and content and how we can weave this together. And I feel like earlier in my career, this was a missed opportunity for me to really think through how that we can layer on these supports for students and how we are supporting that language acquisition process while we are also supporting content learning at the same time. There was a time when I feel like I was working on something really hard in one room, my students would go to another room, work on something different, and we didn't really always collaborate. We weren't always sharing our work together among colleagues of content area and EL instructors. So we're going to think today about how we can intertwine that and how that they really support one another. So how do we do that? And building off of the things that were noted this morning, we start everything with knowing our students. We know them personally. We get to know them. What are their interests? What do they like? Where are they from? Knowing them on that personal level. And then also knowing them, looking at student data, layering on those pieces so we have a better understanding of who our students are and what their needs are. We also do this through building relationships with our students and also building relationships with our colleagues so that we are able to support one another. We want to assess and understand language acquisition processes and continue to support our colleagues as we collectively deepen our understanding of how to support multilingual students. So continuing with language and content, we want to think about how to build these systems that provide equitable instruction to students. Accessible instruction must occur throughout the school day and not just in 1 hour of EL instruction. So really thinking about how do we build our capacity as EL specialists, as EL instructors, to deepen our toolbox. But as we do that, sharing those findings and sharing our successes with our colleagues so that we can ensure that students aren't receiving 1 hour or a set amount of accessible instruction throughout the day, but they are receiving this throughout, not just in that 1 hour. And so how can EL specialists and content area teachers support one another? We want to share those instructional strategies. We want to collaboratively set goals for students. So as we are working, thinking about students, thinking about language acquisition, and we are setting those goals for students, that we're collaboratively working with our counterparts, those content area teachers, so that we are meshing those goals together and assessing them together so that we know we're all working towards the same goal of student success. So we might be coming at it from the lens of thinking through language acquisition. They may be thinking of it through content area standards, but we want to find where we can overlap and where we have those intersection of learning. So we want to build community to support students' linguistic and academic needs. And so thinking about ways to build that collective understanding and deepen our own toolboxes. So we're going to think about today how we can do that through the mode of co-teaching. So there's lots of different models of instruction that we can think about, but today we're really going to dig in on co-teaching and thinking about how we can serve students in this model. Raise your hand if you have engaged in co-teaching in your school. Okay, so we have a pretty good understanding of these models, and these are the most commonly discussed models that we'll be using and discussing today. So looking at the one leads, one supports, and so this is where we have one teacher who leads the whole group instruction, and another teacher who is going to continue to support students' understanding throughout the lesson. And so this can provide targeted instruction for a group of EL students, or it could be one EL student in the classroom. So this does ensure that the learning will be aligned to content, and it provides opportunity for in-the-moment scaffolds. And so as we think through the models of co-teaching today, I would encourage you to kind of think through how could this be used throughout a semester, throughout a unit, or throughout a class. So I won't offer that there is one mode of co-teaching that's going to be most effective. I would consider, what are the needs of this unit? What are the needs of this class? How can I work with my colleague to make this effective? So as we're thinking about one leads, one support, when I think of this model, I often think of, okay, if we're doing a lesson and we have something that's whole group in the beginning, we might come together for the first 10 or 15 minutes of a classroom. If a content area teacher is providing the instruction, I may be circulating and providing supports for a student or for a group of students. So if a teacher is discussing something and then the content area teacher probes for understanding, I may circulate to a student and follow up to probe to make sure that they are understanding the content and to kind of deepen that discussion with them. So the second form of co-teaching we're going to talk about is parallel teaching. And so this is when we have two teachers who are teaching the same content to two groups of students. And I think this is a really exciting and powerful strategy that can be used within the co-teaching model. So within this model, there certainly must be some strong collaboration between the EL specialist and the content area teacher, because essentially what you're asking is that the content area teacher really become strong and equipped in this language acquisition process. So if they go to a small group of students, that they are also able to provide those strategies for the student. You're asking for the EL specialist to have a really deep understanding of that content area knowledge so that when they have that small group of students, that they can work with the language acquisition needs and also have the understanding of that content area knowledge as well. So within this, two teachers teaching two groups of students, but we have the same content being provided with the instruction. So within this, the benefit is that we have increased opportunity for collaboration among educators and increased student-to-teacher engagement and feedback. something that I think that's really powerful in this is that if we have two groups of students with two teachers, we have two teachers who are probing and asking questions. That means we have twice as many students who are answering and responding. We have more deep, rich conversations. So I think there's a really powerful possibilities in that. Station teaching. Students receive instruction through teacher-supported small groups. So when I'm thinking about station teaching, I kind of think that this is often the entry point into co-teaching or into that collaboration among teachers, because while there has to be some pre-planning, of course, it's not quite to the level sometimes as others. So thinking about station teaching as a potential entry point. So in this picture, I was doing station teaching with a group of students, and another teacher had another group of students while we were providing the instruction to two others as well. So there were 4 groups within that classroom. Okay, and then we have team teaching. So we have 2 teachers who are collaboratively teaching the same instructional content. And so this is when I think about co-teaching, I think we often, this is what our minds go to, that we have 2 teachers maybe providing this instruction at the same time, kind of feeding off each other, and it's a fluid type lesson. So the lesson benefits from both instructors' expertise, and they kind of work together in tandem to do that. Then we have the alternate teaching models, where this is where we have one teacher who's providing instruction to a whole group, and then we have the second teacher who's providing instruction with a small group. And so this can be used, maybe a teacher is needing to do some reinforcement, maybe some pre-teaching if we've used a formative assessment and we've determined that there is a need for some pre-teaching or some follow-up from a previous lesson. This is a strategy that could be used. And so as we're thinking about the models, I would just continue to encourage you to think through, when would this be a good fit in a co-teaching classroom? When would this be something that could be used? And I think a lot of times in co-teaching, you'll see models kind of being used throughout fluidly and moving through. So considerations for the co-teaching model. This leverages strengths and knowledge of multiple experts. You're pulling the ESL specialist into the conversation. We have the content area teacher bringing their knowledge of students and content into the conversation as well. It does require specific and intentional collaborative planning. So we're going to talk more about that as well. Just the need for the planning. So co-teaching is so powerful, and I feel like I advocate for where it can be used, but it does necessitate planning. So we have to make sure that we're working together so that we have clear roles and expectations. It also strengthens the collective community of educators working to support students. So ultimately, we want all educators that are working with students to have that understanding of language acquisition. When we're talking about students' language levels and the data that we are familiar with, we want to make sure that all teachers and all educators who are working with these students also have this understanding. So we want to build that understanding, build that awareness, and we also want to increase the toolbox for educators so that they know, okay, if I have this student in my classroom, here's a strategy that I can use. So student considerations for the co-teaching model. So when we're thinking about, okay, would this be a good fit for this classroom, for this school, for this grade? Here are some things that we can think through to determine whether it would be a good fit. English proficiency level, that would be a consideration. The grade level, educational background of the student, and the percentage of ELs in a class or grade. So while maybe not one of these factors would determine whether this would be a good fit or not, making sure that we're layering on all of these pieces of information will help to inform the selection of a model. Okay, so thinking about the cycle of instruction, so this is very similar to this, as we're providing instruction for our students, but when we're thinking about the co-teaching model, we want to make sure that we're going through all 4 of these stages, that we're thinking through co-planning, co-teaching, co-assessing, and co-reflection. So in order to be able to, for 2 educators to step into a room and to teach together collaboratively, we want to make sure that there is a plan in place, that both educators know the content that will be assessed, that both educators know what instruction will be provided, and that they understand the roles in the classroom. So thinking about co-planning, so first of all, we want to think about the structure of co-planning. So when will the educator team work together to collectively plan? So is there going to be a specific time for planning? Will the ESL teacher and the content area teacher meet together to be able to plan to develop that lesson, that unit? And so what structures are in place that will specifically allow for these conversations? Is this something that will happen during the planning each week? Is this something that will happen during a specific time for backward design type planning? Thinking about these structures. And so as we're thinking about planning, it's really important that we are solidifying and being specific with our roles. So thinking about the ESL specialist, serving as the linguistic specialist and providing that culturally responsive instructional tools and strategies to support diverse students' needs, linguistic abilities, and needs in order to experience success. So thinking about the role of the EL specialist and the role of the content teacher, and knowing that we're both coming together to work together to meet students' needs and provide them in order to be successful. So when we're co-planning, what tools or documents will be used to facilitate discussions around the unit and the lesson planning? Where will those tools or documents be housed? And what will be the expectation around the timing of those things? So if we're working on a lesson plan, will we be working on paper lesson plans? Is this something we'll be collaboratively working with online? Thinking through some of those ideas so that when we know, okay, we have a CFA coming up, this is my role, this is what I'm working on this, and when will we be expected to have it completed? I think being specific and being clear on timing and expectations really helps it be successful in the co-teaching. So thinking about the structures of co-teaching, what systems and structures in the master schedule are in place to allow co-teaching to successfully occur. So thinking about the timing of classes and opportunities for potential groupings of clusters of grades or clusters of classes, and thinking about opportunities in the schedule. So how will the co-teaching cycle be supported throughout the school year? How will we continually assess progress and success throughout the year? So touching back on the roles, what will the role of each educator in the room be? And will those roles shift throughout the lesson or the unit? And so we talked about the role of the ESL specialist and the role of the content area specialist. And so in this classroom, I would enter the room, and for about the first 10 minutes of the classroom during this co-teaching model, they were doing a shared read. So I would work with the student during the shared read time and provide supports through that. After that, we would shift from the whole group to station teaching. And so then we would pull off into different small groups, and our content would be connected to the lesson. And so thinking about even within a lesson, even within one day, we may shift from different models of co-teaching. So what resources are necessary and available to support collaboration among educators and to ensure success of students? So there's so many resources out there for co-teaching right now, and it's definitely a topic that's being discussed a lot. And also thinking through in your school, what's necessary, what would we need to be successful in co-teaching? So thinking about schedules, thinking about ensuring that all students are receiving the supports that they need throughout the day. And co-assessing. leveraging multiple forms of assessment data to inform instruction. So educators collectively construct and assess learning through formative and summative assessments. And so we want to make sure that as we are working with our partners and we are collaborating on this, that we are continually assessing what we're working on. We're assessing it through student data to inform our instruction as we move forward. So some of the benefits of co-teaching are to increase access to content instruction through equitable and linguistically responsive instructional practices, deepen content area teachers' understanding of cultural and linguistic aspects of learning, and to streamline student learning and prevents learning in silos. So we talked about how, sometimes in the past, ESL instruction was happening in one room, content area instruction was happening in another room, and there wasn't a lot of collaboration among educators. There wasn't a lot of interconnective learning happening. And so thinking about co-teaching really facilitating that learning, and that connected learning, that overlapping learning. And strengthen engagement of multilingual students in the content area classroom. We ultimately want to continue to increase engagement and provide opportunities for students to engage in that Tier 1 content. And so this, providing that the ELL teacher is in the classroom, supporting in that co-teaching, making sure that content is accessible is definitely going to increase that accessibility of Tier 1. And so how do we know if we're doing it right? This is a question that we hear a lot in co-teaching. How do I know that I'm doing it right? How do I know that we're using the right model? And so we want to think through that effective co-teaching is what works for the students in the classroom. So if we're continually assessing and thinking through the needs of students, assessing it through our data and looking at that, that's how we'll know if the co-teaching model is working effectively. And we want to be willing and open and communicate our expertise and our experience. So sharing that open communication with our colleagues. Hey, yesterday's lesson, I feel like this didn't work really well. Let's make a shift. Let's try something different. And just being open with that. I think just being authentic and being your true self, I think that will be received well with your colleague. And then when educators work together, students benefit. So we just want to think through that. The more collective, the more collaborative we can work with other educators, ultimately that benefits our students. And so with that, I will open up the floor to questioning.
So what is your model? You're in Hamblin? Mm-hmm. So what's your model for how you use co-teaching?
Okay, so that really is determined on the needs of the school. So in elementary, middle, and high school, and in different schools. So each school kind of looks at the demographics of students, the makeup of the population, and kind of collectively determines what is going to be the best model. So there are some schools that use the co-teaching model, and there are some schools that are using pull-out instruction, and several that are using a blend.
I guess I would assume it's in your larger schools.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you recommend a small school with only one teacher if they were interested in doing the blend? Because mm-hmm. I think it would be impossible to do the full-on. How would you suggest that they work through that? Because I don't think there's a person in here that doesn't love the true co-teaching model, mm-hmm. regardless of which one you do. Mm-hmm. We know there's a lot of research behind that, as long as the teachers aren't treated as a secondary teacher and that
right.
they have full equity within the classroom,
mm-hmm.
that co-teaching is definitely a benefit.
Yeah.
So how do you suggest a teacher do that if they want to do that? Because planning becomes the key, and
yeah.
I guess the state is changing some of the recommendations about co-teaching mm-hmm. for next year. So if there's no co-planning, how can, but explain how a teacher could do it if there were one teacher in a school. Can you do that?
Yeah, and I think really thinking through logistics, first of all. If you're thinking about if you're one teacher in one school, looking at, is there clusters of students? Where are the students throughout the grades? And then there has to be planning in order for there to be co-teaching. And so that is the challenge. An entry point into planning, I think, could be that, like, online lesson planning so that we're all kind of using the same document, we're collectively working in that. But in order to have those sit down and discussions, I think at least ensuring that you are part of that grade level's planning at some point throughout the week or during a unit to make sure that you can be part of those conversations. Yeah, I think that's kind of a school. You really have to think through the specifics of the school and the scheduling, but yes, I totally agree that the planning is the ultimate necessary piece to the co-teaching.
What was did you have a reference that, like, did you get this from a book? Or, I mean, I know of a book, but I mean, like, if people wanted to learn more about this, do you have a book that you could recommend?
Yes, there are several co-teaching pieces by Honingsville and Dove that are excellent resources, and that's kind of moving, and we're gaining more knowledge around that. But they are definitely experts in the field, and so that's where some, I think they have kind of shifted from that specific co-teaching, the 5 model. But yeah, that would be an excellent resource.
With the new state law coming away from the co-teaching model, are you planning to apply for the waivers, or are you going to change the definition and call it content-based instruction?
So thinking about, as things are shifting, looking at making sure that what we are doing is aligning with policy. And so thinking about if we're using that model, we'll just have to make sure that we're following those guidelines that are there as they kind of develop and they come out to make sure that we're falling under that policy.
I just wanted to respond. I am one ESL teacher in a small school, and we did some co-teaching last year. And we did, so as for 5th grade, a lot of high content, high reading, all of that as far as comprehension. So I went into the classroom. We basically did the lead teach support in that environment. I also, though, pulled the students whose language levels were not as high for 30 minutes in the morning, and we did your basic grammar structure, your pictures and vocabulary, basic communication. So we did a combination of pull out, push in, if you want to call it that, but it was very tricky. I started teaching the moment the kids hit the door. They brought breakfast with them. There was no downtime for them or me. So it was but it was very good, and the kids did a very good job. With 2nd grade, we did more of the parallel teaching, and I had a mixed group. So I had my ML students, and I had some other students in my group, and then depending on where their movement was for that particular lesson or plan, we then would switch groups, and the gen ed teacher might have some ESL students. So, thank you.
Yeah, I agree. And to connect to that, when I have engaged in a full co-teaching model, so all like throughout the day, all my instruction was through the co-teaching model. I would finish 1 minute with this classroom and move directly to the next classroom, unless it was time for my planning. But yeah, really maximizing that instructional time, and like in the picture where they were in the shared reading time. They were already there, and I walked in the room, and I jumped in with them, and then I would leave them and go to the next one. So I think that can also be a positive, is that you get to maximize that instructional time, and there isn't always that loss of trying to take kids and move them and kind of that shuffle.
I will just add one point of clarity. In the move from ESL policy a few years ago to ESL rule, push-in was entirely taken out. It's not anything new with the most recent changes to rule. It just was not as emphasized when that shift first happened as it is now.
In your co-teaching model, do you always push into the ELA block, or do you sometimes push into science or social studies or other content areas?
I have only pushed into the ELA block, but this year we are thinking through some different possibilities in that. So yes, I have only pushed into the ELA, or I have co-taught in the ELA.
I'm an ELA teacher for 3rd grade, and they asked for volunteers to co-teach. So this is going to be my first year co-teaching, and we're going to try it. Have you seen an improvement in the reading skills of our T4s with the co-teaching?
I think there is definite potential through co-teaching because you are able to provide scaffolds and support that might not always be necessary for those students, but in a moment could potentially be supportive. So I think there is definitely some potential for being in the room and being part of co-teaching for those students. Yes.
Okay, good, because considering our 3rd grade retention law, that we are trying to find ways to support those T4s that don't get the accommodations on the TCAP.
Yeah. Yeah, and thinking about, as students are exiting, being able to hand them off and be able to ensure that they are successful.
So I have a question. What would happen if you got a newcomer? So that usually that's what happens. So I'm looking like if I'm the only teacher there and we're implementing this content-based instruction or co-teaching, and then I get a newcomer, it's like, okay, now I've got to change because I've got to be able to give the services this student needs, which is basic English, completely different.
Yeah.
So what would you do in those circumstances?
So, in a co-teaching model, still continuing to provide those entry points for that student. And so thinking about the needs of that specific student, they may be in the Tier 1 instruction, so they receive that there, but we may determine, hey, this student's going to need an additional 30 minutes of targeted specific instruction for them at a later time during the day. Or they may receive something also. So just kind of thinking about the need of the student specifically. So if there is a need there that we can support additionally, we might need to do that. We might need to look into thinking through that. And we did that actually. We've done that. So serving those students in the co-teaching model, but also thinking through maybe a 30-minute skinny block where we would provide targeted instruction for a newcomer. Yeah.
How many grade levels would you be able to see?
It would really depend on the amount.
It's like a K through 5.
Yeah.
Because then you'd have that newcomer and it's like a 5th grader, and it's like, okay, do I take you with me to a lower grade or something? That's where you start getting these issues.
Yeah, and so you'd really just have to think about the scheduling of that specific
and then making sure they're not missing
school.
PE and it gets overwhelming.
Yeah, for sure. The logistics is definitely the biggest piece. Yeah.
I had a question. If there are 2 ELL teachers in the same room, would this same model work? If this is a a pull-out situation, same as with the EL and the content area teacher, would the same model work there?
Yeah, and I have participated in that previously. I think there's definitely potential in, anytime when you have 2, you have more people who are collectively working to support students. I think that's ultimately going to be a success. So yeah, I think so. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much for letting me be here with you all and learn with you today.
Thank you, Ms. Hopper. This was very, very helpful. So thank you very much.